Hi, my name is Sissy, and I want to welcome you to my show, Getting Healthy with Sis. I am married to my hunky husband, Matt, and together we own a fitness and nutrition coaching studio in Lakeland, Florida called Restoration Fitness and Nutrition. We have 2 little boys, and I've been a nutrition coach for 5 years, helping countless people to revamp their lives and see amazing results implementing one healthy habit at a time. My passion is to help women just like me realize they don't have to be a victim to poor eating habits and poor health. Instead, through proper education and empowerment, they can take control of their health and live the healthiest and happiest life possible. As you tune into my show, I promise you're going to learn new things about your health. You're going to be inspired to take action towards your goals, and you're going to have a ton of fun along the way. Welcome to the Getting Healthy with Sis show, and today we have, I have my husband Matt here with me, and this is going to be a little bit of a different episode. I'm not going to be talking about, the 16 ways that you can be the healthiest version of yourself, although what I am going to be talking about does have to do with health, and it's more of, I feel like, emotional and spiritual health that we're kind of going to be focusing on today. But just to kind of lead into the topic that we're going to be talking about today, it's something that's near and dear to both of our hearts because it's a big part of our story and our family story. And October is a month that is labeled as Pregnancy Loss Awareness Month. And so we wanted to do 2 to 3 episodes this month, kind of sharing our family story with losing babies. So, and pregnancy loss. So a couple of statistics just to lead us into this is that 1 in 175 births in the U.S. are stillbirths. And we have experienced that. And then between 1 and 5% of pregnancies are lost in the second trimester. So it's a very small percentage, but it does happen. And we have experienced that as well. So it's more rare, but we have experienced it. And so we have experienced, those are both kind of unique losses. And we just wanted to share our story because I believe that this is, going through this was like a nightmare the first time that we went through it, and then we got really lucky and blessed and got to go through it again within a year's time, a calendar year's time. And I always think about like the first time we went through it with our first son, George, who was stillborn. That was like a bullet that took me to my knees, but I never thought I would experience something like that ever again. And then here we go about 10 months later, and we're losing another baby in a very similar way, on a very similar timeline. And that was kind of like the bullet that like took me out. Like it was like that took my feet out from under me and like put me on my face. And so like if there was any like survival left of me after we lost our first baby, I got completely like, wouldn't you say that kind of the second time?
Oh, yeah.
The second time, it's like, okay, there's nothing left. Like I'm destroyed now. So anyway, so these next few episodes, we're just going to share our story. And our hope is that, number one, we'll be able to bring awareness and hope to women that have gone through this. But I am not so naive to think that this story of losing babies only applies to women who have lost babies. I believe that if you have lost anything in life, or if you have gone through any type of pain or suffering where you are asking why and you don't know why it's happening to you, you can get something out of this. And so we just wanted to take this opportunity really to share our testimony. And one of the things that Matt and I say a lot is that the word testimony, one of our pastors told us this. Don't quote us on it was really good, but the word testimony means do it again, Lord. So like when we share our story, we are saying, Lord, The way that you showed up in our lives, God, do it again. You are the same God, and you can show up this way in other people's lives, and so do it again. So this was definitely something that we never foresaw, or thought that we would go through, especially twice back to back. We never thought we would, but it is something that I say I am so grateful for and so thankful for, because it truly changed my life. And I was a completely different person on the other side of walking through this, and more dependent on the Lord, and I loved him more. And I felt closer to him and saw his hand at work in my life more than I had before the pain entered my life. Would you say that as well? So we're just going to kind of start. We're going to start and talk about our first baby, and then we'll go through and we'll talk about our second. And if you're lucky, we might talk to you about our little redemption baby, Wilson, our little rainbow baby after the storm. So anyways, is there anything you want to share before we get started?
Let's jump right in.
Okay, cool. All right, so we had our first son, Maddie. He was our little bundle of fire and life and all things. Still is. Loud and energetic, all the things. And I knew, I have an older sister, and I had watched her walk through some miscarriages. And so I knew that like this road of being a mom and becoming pregnant was not going to be like pain and risk free. But you always just kind of think when you're pregnant, like, okay, if I can make it through the first trimester, then like I'm home free, like it's definitely more common. I think 80% of pregnancy losses happen in the first trimester, and a big percent of those is before the first 6 weeks. And so, as a woman, you can probably identify with this. You think if I can just get past that, that first trimester, I'll be good. And of course, naive, unscathed by pain of childbirth and bringing children into the world, that was probably me as well. So we found out that baby number 2 was a boy. And we were in discussion, and we decided that we wanted to name him after both of our dads. So he took our father's names. So George is my dad, and Edward is Matt's dad. And so we named him George Edward. And that year at Thanksgiving, we got to tell at Thanksgiving dinner, we told my family and, told my dad, like, Dad, we've named our son after you, and this is why, we wanted to honor you, and why we feel like you are, an admirable man to name our child after. And we did the same thing with Matt's family. It was just really sweet to be able to honor our dads. So that was at Thanksgiving. And then fast forward into December, we were about midway through December, and I remember sitting at the kitchen table one day, and I was about in my 20th week of pregnancy. And I remember sitting there eating lunch, and it was a Friday, and I just had this thought. I was like, I haven't felt George move in the last few days. And it was like in my head, it was like the last few days. But I just kind of quickly moved on past that, because, if you've ever been pregnant, like, especially early on, you feel them and then you don't, and then life gets busy and you move on, and then you're laying in bed at night and here they go, they start kicking and all that kind of stuff. So that was a Friday, but I had that thought and I quickly moved on. And then the next day, we were taking Maddie to the zoo for like this Christmas extravaganza thing. And I remember being like on the way to Tampa, and I just said out loud, I told Matt, I was like, I haven't felt George move in a few days. But again, like being naive, and I just said it out loud and didn't really think anything of it at all. Because again, you're in that zone where you don't lose babies at 20 weeks, And so we did the zoo thing, and I think because I said it out loud out of my mouth, then it was like I kind of made a mental note of it and kind of started paying attention. So I remember that night when I went to sleep, usually at nighttime when you get still, you can feel them start moving in some way, shape, or form. So I remember like kind of really trying to tune in, and I didn't feel anything that night. And then here comes Sunday, so the next day, and of course you're moving around, busy day, all that kind of stuff. I didn't really notice that I felt him that day, but when I went to sleep on Sunday night, I could not like sleep well at all. And I just remember like laying in bed and praying, and I was just like rubbing my stomach and just praying like, Lord, help me to feel him move. God, would you please let him move? And I just slept terribly that night. And this was when our gym was in our old location, and I had planned to be up at the gym early that morning, even though I slept terribly. I was like, I was going to go to the 6:30 a.m. class. And so I wound up getting up and going. And I remember a friend of mine, Leah Axe, she was a mother of 5, and she was going to be there that morning. And so when I got to the gym, I was like, maybe she could help me out a little bit. And so I asked her, I was like, Leah, I haven't felt my baby move in several days. Like, do you think I should be concerned? And she was like, well, were you feeling him move before? And I was like, yeah, I was. And she was like, you need to call your doctor this morning. And when she said, like, Leah is not like a worrisome, she's a very trusting, she's not an alarmist at all. She's a very trusting girl, mother of 5, doesn't freak out easily. And she was like, you need to call your doctor this morning. And when she said that to me, I was kind of like, I almost started crying, because I was just like, what in the world? And so I remember I did the workout that morning, and one of the things that was interesting, so I think I went up to Matt after the workout, and I was like, I need to call the doctor this morning. I was like, Leah thinks I need to. And do you remember me telling you that? Mm-hmm. And it was very weird, because I got in the car, and like we've said, Maddie was 2 at the time, and he was never quiet. He was never quiet. He was always loud, full of energy, talkative, all of those things. And I remember after the workout getting back in my car, and we rode home in complete silence. Like, it was so weird. Do you remember me telling you that? Like, he was quiet. It was weird. It was like he knew something was going on with me. And that was just very odd for him at that. It's odd for him now, but that was very odd for him at that stage of life. And so anyways, we get back home, and I think I had to wait until maybe it was like 9 o'clock till the office opened. So I called, told them what was going on. They were like, please come in right away. So we got Maddie to a babysitter, and I went in, and this was in the height of 2020. So this was December 2020, right? Fun times. So I remember, they called me back, and the night before, Sunday night, I had a friend that had lost a baby at 14 weeks, and I had walked with her through that, like 2 or 3 years before, and I remember like seeing how that really destroyed her. Like, I had no clue what she was going through, but I mean, she had to go into the hospital and had to give birth to that baby. And Matt and I like helped with their kids some during that time. And I mean, that was very hard on her. And I remember like that Sunday night before I went in on that Monday, just thinking like, this can't, like, no, there's no way. There's no way. There's no way that I'm going to have to go through. And then I would just like stop those thoughts and be like, he's fine. And then I would go like, what if the worst case has happened? And I'm just like, no, there's like no way I'm going to have to go through that. But then, I was trying to like guard myself from those thoughts. But anyway, so I remember going in, they pulled me back. They, being in the height of 2020, I'm wearing a mask. My nurse is wearing a mask. I'm laying on the table. I'm in there alone because, they wouldn't let
I hadn't gotten there yet, right?
Yeah. And I think I was at that point just like, I'll let you know what's going on. You were at work, I think. But so I couldn't really see my nurse's face because she had a mask on. But anyway, she was using the Doppler. And I just remember she was going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth over my stomach. And, she was like, of course, if you're the nurse in that situation, you're not trying to be an alarmist at all. You're like, it'll be okay, but like, you don't know if it's going to be okay. But anyway, so, she couldn't find anything. And I'm like definitely a glasses half full type of person. Still, like, they're going to find it. I just knew they were going to find it. And then, so she was like, let me get our small ultrasound machine in here. And so she leaves the room and comes in with like another nurse. And I could tell they were kind of on edge. And I think maybe sometime at that point, I called you and was like, they can't find a heartbeat. And so when they pulled him up on the ultrasound in that room on like the small thing, there was no heartbeat. And I just remember I like grabbed my face and was just like, oh no. Like, I just remember saying that and like calling Matt and telling him like they can't find a heartbeat, and I called my sister and my sister was just kind of just like stunned, and so anyways, Matt was like, I'll be right there. And so he came, and I was in that room and I think just like shocked out of my mind, we'll talk about this later, but I've done some pretty intense therapy that really helped me through the trauma of all of these memories. And so actually some of them are a little foggy, and that's because the therapy worked. We'll talk about that later. But anyway, so I think the trauma of that moment has dissipated a little bit, thank God, due to some of the therapy that I went through. But Matt got there and they pulled us into the big ultrasound room with like the big machine and checked, and there was nothing. So do you want to share a little bit about like what you remember? Is there anything you want to share about that moment?
I think for me, like I'm like very quick to believe the best, so for me, I was like very much so like when she told me that, I was like, okay. Like, cause I'm not
There's
like,
going to be a heartbeat.
Yeah. I'm like, that's not final, so like I'm on the way to the, what is that doctor's office? Not a hospital, but
the doctor's office.
Doctor's office. And I just was praying the whole way. I called a buddy of mine too and told him, and we both prayed together too, tearing up a little bit, but like just kind of going after life there, and I think like for me it was nothing's final yet, and so I was going in there believing big, trying to exercise my faith on just what the Lord can do, and so I've seen that happen with friends of mine too, that's happened to, where they just prayed and the Lord brought that baby back to life. And so I was literally like, the Lord can do that too here. So and so
maybe it's a misguided ultrasound.
Yeah. And so when I got in the room, it was like, okay. And so they told us what was going on and stuff, and there was a moment where they showed me, I guess, that that the baby didn't have a heartbeat, and I was like, okay, well, you guys can stay in here if you'd like, but we're gonna pray in here, and hopefully that's okay with y'all. You can leave if you want, but we're gonna pray and believe that life is still there. And so, we prayed, and so, it's really good to. I think the Lord really loves when we actually exercise our faith and go after the things of the Lord and really believe him for who he is and what he can do and what he does do. And so for me, it was, I'm not just going to accept that, I'm going to definitely like see what the Lord thinks and says about it, and so we prayed in that time or whatever. And it was hard, but it was definitely like your heart is spilling out in that moment on just believing the Lord. And I told them after that, I was like, hey, can you put that ultrasound thing back on there, please? And like they would try that, and sure enough, like there was no heartbeat. And again, I was like, I'm going to pray again. I think I prayed twice, I think. And again, same thing, no heartbeat. And so we just kind of were like, okay, we're going to, we'll settle on this right now. But we still continue to pray and to believe. But
well, I want to say Matt did, and we had friends that were, but I was I was so knocked for a loop. I mean, I remember being like, telling even Matt and telling our friends, like, you guys can pray, but like, I just really don't have it in me to like.
Yeah. So that was me, like.
But I love that their faith was like, no, we want to believe that a miracle could happen. But I was very honest and like,
yeah, which was.
If you guys want to believe for me, please. But I
fine.
don't have a lot of faith right now.
Yeah, which was fine. But like, that's a moment where like we stand in the gap there.
Yeah.
And do that. So, and then we met with friends and stuff later that surrounded us, and we just all, what was there, like 8 of us or so, just kind of went after it there. And that was actually a really special time in the midst of like something really hard as losing a child, but so far along. And like, that was actually really special to me, that they were wanting to surround us like that and, believe the best there. And all the way up to the point where when we went to the hospital for, the next process of that thing, I even told them in that hospital room, I was like, I'm going to need you to put a ultrasound on this thing one more time. And so they did that. And sure enough, like it was the same result. And so from there we were kind of like, okay, this is, what the Lord is wanting. So we need to walk through this together and not alone, but with other people as well. And so that was like a really good process there. I feel like for me in the midst of something really hard, but definitely felt the nearness of the Lord very immediately. And so that was
in the ultrasound room.
And so that was like really helpful to see in a place where like it's really hard. You actually need to run towards the healer and not run away from the healer, which is very easy to do when you're going through something really hard. The first place that you tend to want to do is one, shut down, but also kind of run away. And I know, from experience, but also just who the Lord is, he's the only one that can help us. And so I need to run towards him. And so that was definitely like what we're doing and trying to do to the best of our ability. And so that's what we did. But by doing that, we actually got to see a lot of the nearness of the Lord in this first loss, for sure.
Yeah. So back to the doctor's office. So Dr. Schwartz, which we love her. Oh my gosh, she was such a perfect doctor for us. But she was there, and I remember asking her, like, can I have a C-section? And that really, from the very beginning, when I found out that I lost him, I was like, I cannot go through with this birthing process. Like, that was the unknowns of that were very scary to me. And she was like, no, like, you're going to have to deliver him. And I was like, okay. And so anyways, of course we are just crying mess, and we leave that, that ultrasound room and walked out of her office. And a bizarre thing, like, I think my reality was so warped, was that we had a friend that was sitting in the waiting room. Mm-hmm. And I looked directly at her and did not recognize her. I think that's how, like, and Matt later told me it was Sonia. He was like, that was Sonia sitting in there. And I was like, I looked directly at her and did not see her. Like, so I think, if that tells you a little bit of my mental state. But anyways, we went home, and Maddie was still at a precious friend's house that kept him for us so that we could really just let this sink in. And so it must have been, we went home, and it must have been for 5 or 6 hours that we sat on our couch and cried and cried and cried, and called our family and called our close friends and talked to friends. And then later in that afternoon, here we are, we're business owners in the middle of owning a bit of, a newer business. So Matt had to go to work that night.
Yeah, I showed up to the class, and like my eyes, because we'd been crying so much, my eyes were like really swollen, puffy.
Yeah.
And everybody in the classes were like,
yeah,
what had just happened, and what are you doing?
What is
here?
happening? Yeah.
And like, I just, I just had to continue going with that. And so I got through those classes looking like a hot mess. But
our friends, we had sweet friends, Jay and Tim, they came over that day and were just so sweet to us. And I didn't want to stay at home alone while Matt went to work. And so they were like, will you come to our house? And so they brought me over, and like that was just that day, like, I hadn't slept the night before, and then you find out that you've lost your baby and you've literally cried all day long. It's just, you're just a mess, and they brought me over, and they have this like beautiful guest room and bathroom, and they were like, you just go in there, like, what do you need? And were just like so sweet to me. And I remember I called my friend on the phone who had lost her baby at 14 weeks, and we had a good conversation, and she was like, Sissy, like, she was like, this changed me and my husband's life forever. But she said, I don't think that we would still be married today if we had not gone through that. And because they had gone through a lot of hard things in their marriage before they lost their baby. And so she was like, God used that, going through that deep valley, to bring us closer together. And anyways, I remember like taking a shower that night at my friend's house in her beautiful bathroom, and just feeling like almost like detached from my body. It's a very weird sensation when you can see a pregnant belly and you have felt a baby in there moving, and then you know that the baby is dead and you're still carrying it. It's a very troubling thing. And so I remember, taking a shower that night and just almost like not even wanting to like look down at my stomach, because it was just so hard going through that. And I got out of the shower, got dressed, and by that time, Matt's getting done with classes, so he comes over there, and then we have all of these precious friends that just like show up at our friend's house, and which was just so sweet. Like, they all have kids and they all have families, but they like dropped everything and came to just sit with us and listen to us and ask us, what do you guys need? And what can we do? And how can we be here for you? And can we pray for you or pray with you? And so we did all of that. And again, I was just very emotionally spent. And today, as I was reading back through like some of my journal entries, I specifically wrote like that I will never forget like what Matt's face looked like that day, because his eyes were so puffy. And like his face was so red because he had literally been crying like all day. And I just would never forget that. And so, anyways, we went home that night. We left our friend's house. We went home, and I'll always remember this, that like Matt can sleep in and through anything. So like he gets in the bed, of course, and he's like snoring like within like 5 minutes. And I'm like, I am so mad at you right now. Like, can't you just stay up with me and grieve with me? And he's like snoring. Hey guys, I hope that you're enjoying the show, and I wanted to interrupt real quick just to invite you that if you are listening to this podcast on Apple Podcast, I would be so honored if you would go up in the top right-hand corner of your app and click the follow button. Then if you will scroll down and rate and write a review on the show, that would just make my day. I would love to hear from you, hear how the show is impacting you and how you're enjoying it. And with following the show, you're going to get notifications of every time I release a new episode. If you like to watch my show on YouTube, then I am inviting you to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Tell me what you're liking. Share this with your friends if you think that they can benefit from it. So I appreciate you listening in, and my goal is that this show will edify you and encourage you on the way to better health. So if it's doing that, then I'd love to have you along for the ride by subscribing, liking, sharing, following, commenting, reviewing, all the things that would make my day. So I remember, hearing Matt snore, and it's like kind of like Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, like to his disciples, can't you stay up with me and mourn? Help me through this agony? Nope. Matt's snoring. Anyways, that's just the difference in a man and a woman. But so it was just hard for me to sleep. I mean, how are you supposed to just like fall asleep in that? That was just awful. And so I wanted to read, I wrote this in the middle of the night, that night, and I wanted to read this journal entry. So I said, very sad day today as I have to go to the hospital to give birth to our son who has died in my womb at 20 weeks and 5 days. Devastated, crushed, heartbroken, exhausted, scared, nervous. This seems like this is going to be a slow and steady rip of a Band-Aid, a ripping of a scab that is slow and painful, unavoidable. The only way to get through this is to experience the pain. I wish I could go to sleep and wake up on the other side. I'm afraid to go through this delivery, birth, and post-birth. This seems like it will cut my heart into a million pieces, and I don't want to feel that kind of pain. My heart is aching. I knew I wasn't exempt from hard things with bearing children. I just didn't expect to have to go through this. But in the midst of it all, a faint whisper speaks to me that my sweet Jesus is here, that he is good beyond measure. He is sweeter and more tender and loving than my heart can comprehend. He desires to be near to me through this, and I desire to be near to him. I want my heart to encounter his love in a real and deep way through this. I want to draw near to him in my barrenness, both literal and figurative, and I want to stay there for a moment. I don't want to run and hide or shut down my heart to stop the hemorrhaging. I want to let the pain accomplish what Jesus wishes in me, and I want to fellowship with him in this suffering. Please, Jesus, keep my heart soft. I invite you in to have your way. I want you. I welcome you. Do all that you wish to accomplish in Matt and me through this. We say yes. We need your help. You turn ashes into beauty, and we want that. We want your beautiful story of redemption, even though this is a pain we would have never chosen. We believe that you can do it. We just want to be available. The door is open. With the little strength that we have opened the door to you, and you can come in and do whatever you like to do in us, and we trust you. I love you, Jesus. I cling to you. You are more wonderful and kind than I know. I know our precious baby is with you now. Please please let him see and know how much Matt and I love him and how we can't wait to meet him when we get to heaven. So I wrote that in the middle of the night, knowing like what was going to be coming the next day. And so I didn't sleep that night. So now I'm going on like 2 nights of no sleep. And we finally got to the hospital. They finally let us come in. Like that next day, the afternoon, they called us and were like, we have a bed ready for you guys. And so, we go up there, and, where do they have you go is to the labor and delivery floor, like where babies are being born alive. And you are going there to meet death. Really, you're going there to meet death. And we have hope in the Lord and life to come, but it is death. And that's what it felt like. And there's just no like sugarcoating that. So, we get there, and a sweet little thing was that we had a girl that we knew. She was our first nurse, a really sweet friend, Juliana, and she was there to kind of greet us, and she got me kind of going with my IV and all of that kind of stuff. And then my doctor came in, and she gave me my first dose of medicine to begin to induce labor. And I want to read this scripture too, because while all this was going on, and I was just like, what is happening? I was so afraid. I was so not looking forward to this. Oh my gosh, it was. And I'm not like a worried or anxious person, but I was just a little bit beside myself with the unknowns of what this was going to be. And so I remember like I opened my Bible, and of course, like, where are you drawn when you're like in a ton of pain, like suffering, like the book of Job, like Job suffered so much. And I literally like pull open my Bible, and like this was like one of the first passages that my eyes went to, from Job 19:25-27, and it literally felt like it came off of the page at me. And it said, this is Job speaking, and he was saying, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on this earth. After my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another. How my heart yearns within me. And that verse just came off, and it was like, that was like a verse that became like a verse for me to like cling to, like knowing like no matter what I'm going through right now, like my Redeemer lives. Like I am in a lot of pain, and after I have been destroyed, my baby's life is done. Like his flesh is being destroyed, mine is going to be destroyed. Yet I know that I will see him one day. I will see my Redeemer one day with my own eyes, and how my heart yearns within me. And also just realizing and remembering like George is not here anymore, and like he has now seen God with his own eyes. Like that is the reality that he is living in. And so that was like a verse that kind of came to me in the hospital before kind of all of the intensity started. But I remember my doctor came in, she gave me that first dose of medicine, and I remember she left, and I just remember I just started like sobbing, and my nurse was there, and Matt was there. And do you remember this?
A little bit.
But I remember I had written, I'm going to read this part in my journal. So once they had taken care of everything with me, my doctor came in around 4 p.m. and gave me my first dose of medication to induce labor. After she left the room, I lay there on the bed and began to sob. Here I was in this cold hospital room. They had injected medication in me to induce labor, and I was soon going to birth our son. And it was just the most depressing situation ever. a place where new life was meant to come forth on the labor and delivery floor. But here we were about to experience death face to face. As I sobbed, Matt and my nurse comforted me. They let me cry. I tried to come up with words to explain how I felt, and this is all I could come up with. I said out loud, I feel like I am the one dying. That's really how it felt, and it was not a happy dying experience. It was death, it was final, and it was very depressing. My nurse rubbed my hand after I said that, and she comforted me and said, that is a really good way to put it. Your son is a part of you, and a part of you will die with him. It felt torturous, and I said out loud, I would never wish this on my worst enemy. I wanted to run. I wanted to escape. I felt like I was in a torture chamber, yet there was no escaping. I had to go through with this, and I remember wishing that somehow I could black out and then come back once George had been born. I wanted to see my son, and I wanted to be present. It was just so emotionally painful that I somehow wanted to escape and not have to go through this. And this was the worst part, birthing him. So that kind of paints a picture of where I was emotionally. I know it's dark and deep, but there's better days coming. But sometimes the dark night of the soul is dark and long. But anyway, so they had to keep coming in. It was like every 3 hours and giving me a little bit more medication, and the contractions would come up. And I remember, Matt had fallen asleep in the middle of the night, and I went to the bathroom and I'd started bleeding, and that just I was just like, oh my gosh, is this, I had no idea, is he just going to come out? Am I going to have to push? Am I going to feel pain? Am I going to know that he's coming? What? I was so troubled. And I remember in the middle of the night, just calling everyone. I called my best friend. I called my sister. I called my mom, and I'm like, someone please answer. And my mom answered, and, she was just like, honey, it's okay. I know, she was just trying her best to help me. And then I called my doctor, who was not at the hospital at the time. And I was just like, can you please do something to help me? I need something to knock the edge off of me. I am going insane. The mental struggle of it all was so insane. And so that was about 1 a.m. They came in and gave me another dose. And that was when things really kind of started picking up. And around 2 a.m., it was okay, these contractions are now getting to the place where I'm having to roll over on my side and breathe through them. And they're intense. And I remember I was begging the nurse for an epidural. And I was kind of super panicky because I was feeling a lot of pain, but I was also in a lot of emotional turmoil. And I was just like, can you please get me an epidural? I am feeling way too much. And so they put me on a morphine drip. And I think every 3 minutes or something, it would let you drip a little bit more. And so when that little light would ding, I would just drip it again. And I just dripped that baby for an hour straight.
A long time.
Yeah.
This can't be good.
But I was just like, this is so painful. It was very painful. It was birth. And I was having to control my breathing. And so anyways, about 3 a.m., things started really picking up, and my water broke. And things got really, 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 really intense, and I felt, this sensation that I needed to push. And, George came out with, I did feel like I had to push him, but he came out with ease. And I remember, immediately I felt so much relief. That feeling that you get through birthing, that release of oxytocin, I got that, I actually felt really relieved and a sense of pleasure, which was very surprising to me in that moment. I was just so thankful to be done. And I was laying on my side when he was born. And so Matt pulled the blanket up and Matt saw him first. And I knew that like I needed to prepare myself. Like I wasn't just like, yeah, bring him over. I want to see, like I knew I needed to be in my right mind and mentally prepared for meeting him. But I will literally I will never forget that moment. Do you remember, like, when you saw him, what you did?
I think so.
Do you want to tell it, or do you want me to share my perspective of it?
What I remember is when I saw him, it was super hard, like for sure. But I picked him up and just held him in my hands, and he's about the size of.
Yeah, I think he
was
was about
bigger than my hand,
Mm-hmm.
and I just remember saying like, telling you or whatever, but I was like, he's so beautiful. Mm-hmm. Like that was like the first thing that like came out of my mouth was like, wow, he's like so beautiful. Mm-hmm. And then from there it was just like a weeping fest, mm-hmm. But of just looking at him and like gazing at him and staring at him, and so it was like, it was really mm-hmm. real. But I remember those were like the first words that kind of came out of my mouth. So.
Yeah. And I could hear Matt. So I was, of course, terrified of meeting him. That was very troubling to me because I was like, what's he going to look like? He's been dead for 6 days. Like, what is, ugh. And like, I remember being on my side and hearing Matt like beginning to like sob. And he was like, he is so beautiful. Like, that's like all he kept saying. And I just remember that like brought so much peace to my heart because I was so worried about seeing him physically for the first time. And that like eased my emotion so much to hear that was like his knee-jerk response to seeing him. And, and he asked the nurse, he said, can I hold him? Like that was like his, I don't know, I just thought, wow, like, I was so afraid to meet my child in that way. And Matt was like, that's my son. I want to hold him, and so anyways, from there, I was super, super drugged on morphine, hardcore. I tried to sit up in bed a few times. I passed out and started convulsing at one point. Like, I needed to sleep. And I also did not want to meet George and hold him for the first time drugged. And so at this point I'd been awake for like 3 straight days and it was just bad. So we turned the lights out, we went to sleep, and I got like about 3 hours sleep and I felt a little better. And so let some of that medication wear off a little bit. And it was when I woke up later that morning that I was like, okay. I was, of course, very nervous about meeting him for the first time, but he was in our room and waiting for us, like in a baby bed that they normally are in, the little incubator thing. And so I got to meet him and hold him, and that was really hard, I'm not gonna lie. Like, that was very troubling. And Matt seemed like he was able to connect more with George in the physical form in that way than I was. But it just is what it is. I mean, I had been through a lot of trauma that was very traumatic for me as a woman. And Matt was very much like, I don't know, you seemed very like able to connect with him, and not troubled in the same way that I was. And so anyways, we had some time in our room with him, and but because George was past 20 weeks, that is considered a stillbirth. And so George, had to be taken to the funeral home, and we had to go to the funeral home, and he was cremated, and we had to sign papers and all of that kind of stuff. So once we were we had several hours with him, and it was sweet. We played some worship music and read some scripture and just talked. And, once we felt like we had the time that we needed, we were like, okay, like it's time to be done and go home and all of that. So anyways, we came back home, and my mom was there, and we had to go, I think, to the next day to the funeral home. And we had an outpouring of love from our friends from near and far, family near and far. And, is there anything that you want to share about like that next phase of leaving the hospital, kind of how that was for you in the days and weeks to come, like your biggest takeaways maybe from that time?
Yeah.
That you remember?
I know one thing that was very helpful was a few friends. We had a lot of friends reach out for sure and encourage us. But a couple things that some of my close friends sent was a song that they thought about for us, that they sent us. It's a Jonathan David Helser song that was super just...
It had been written after a friend of his lost a child.
So it was very purposeful to our situation.
Yeah.
And it was just beautiful, and that was helpful too. It was like a way of the Lord saying, like, I see you guys, and your child is okay. He's well in heaven, and so that was really, really helpful. And then another friend of mine sent me like a video of a message from a guy that actually encountered going to heaven and came back to earth. It was pretty profound, but the things that he said that he saw in heaven was really cool, but very encouraging to us in that moment, for what they said about children and lost babies in particular, and aborted babies as well, but in our situation, a loss, and that was very helpful also in the stage that we're in after the hospital and like the next week or so. And so it's very encouraging, but like, I think the whole time that helped me kind of move through the process a little bit quicker, or at a pace that I felt like was, I couldn't believe that it was how it was, but was because the Lord like totally was like holding us and surrounding us with community as well. That was, I couldn't ask for anything better. Our families, our community here, but then also just how the Lord was like really, with us the whole time. It was very helpful, and like never felt jaded, never felt any kind of resentment, or I wasn't mad at the Lord. I mean, I didn't have any of that, but was able to kind of move through pretty quickly, I feel like. And then you'd have moments in your grief, right? As you're grieving, I would have moments that were like tough. We'd break down, and things like that. But that was I knew that and felt that to be normal and okay, to voice that, to let it know. I think a big takeaway was, for me, now that I'm thinking about it, is in a time like this that was so difficult and unexpected, and I think I mentioned earlier about like it's easy to kind of run away from everything and hide and shut everything out and all of that. That was like not the right thing to do, and I don't think really ever is the right thing to do, especially in this kind of situation. I understand like we needed our time together, like alone, yes, but we were an open book with a lot of things on like allowing people to come in, allowing people to help us, and allowing the Lord to kind of really heal our hearts there. And like that was ultimately how I think we moved through this the way that we did, the speed that we did, when we had hard moments, when we had grieving moments, moving through our healing, how open we were to people and to each other and stuff like that. And that was like the way to do it. because that like totally helped us and helped me for sure. I know I'll speak for myself, but
Yeah.
I think it helped us both. But it helped me move through this very well, and it helped me a lot. So
Yeah.
I
And
definitely would say that the big takeaway was being very vocal and honest, how you feel, and with others, and letting people in was
Yeah.
super helpful for healing. So
yeah. And that was like a prayer of mine, because I think it's very tempting when you feel like intense pain to be like run away or hide or wall up your heart, because you're just like, I don't know how to deal with all these strong emotions. But like, I knew, like, Lord, I want my heart to remain open and to remain tender. And that to me looks like being open with people, being open with my husband. If I need to lay on the couch and have a good long cry, like, I'm going to do it. And so that was, I mean, there were beautiful things from that, but I feel like a big thing that I left that situation with was like, wow. So there was nothing ever wrong with me. That's something that we haven't said. There was nothing ever that happened to me that they could point to, like, oh, there was nothing with George when he was born that was like, oh, had this going on with him. Like, there was none of that. And so there was a lot of questions. And I remember Graham Cook once said, why is an invalid question that makes you an invalid? And that's something that I have thought of a lot through going through this pain, is that, like, it's so easy to be like, why? Like, God, why? Why did you, why? But that's like really an invalid question. Like, it's not a good question to ask. And if you get stuck in why, it makes you an invalid. Like, you become someone that cannot move and that is paralyzed. And anyway, so I just, there was nothing wrong with me. There was nothing apparently wrong with George. There was just a lot of questions. And for me, one thing that, like, as I processed it with the Lord, that, like, verses that kept coming to me were verses that would say, like, the Lord and his ways are perfect, and he does whatever pleases him. And I knew there was such a deep part of me that was like, Lord, you are perfect. Like, you did not make a mistake. And there is something in this that you knew would be good and right for us to go through, that is going to bring you pleasure and is going to ultimately bring us pleasure for our good by allowing us to go through this. And so, but going through it, I knew, I was like, that was such a fluke. There's no way that would ever happen to us again. Like, if we can just get pregnant again, which I felt like we could, because we got pregnant pretty easily. Whenever we were like, let's try, we would get pregnant right away. And so I was like, this is never going to happen to us again. And as long, when we get pregnant again, we'll just move right through this. And so that's kind of how I left it. But one thing I didn't say was we wound up having a really sweet ceremony for George at my parents' house in Georgia, because George was named after my dad. That's my dad's name. And we buried his ashes. I think it was Easter weekend. We buried his ashes by this beautiful tree in my parents' backyard, which was actually quite a funny story, because it was a snowball bush. So, like, almost like a hydrangea bush that's meant to, when it's full grown, it's, 3 feet, 4 feet tall. And this bush, I am not kidding you, and it was the middle of spring in Georgia. This bush was probably 20 feet tall. It was humongous, and it had huge white flowers all over it. And it was almost like that bush was like a sign and a wonder itself, because those bushes are not supposed to be that big. It was huge. And that is where we buried his ashes, and we had this beautiful plaque made for him. And our pastor read, I think it was from the book of John, the verse that says, like, unless a grain of wheat dies and falls to the ground and is buried, like, it will not bear much fruit. And so it's just like this really cool picture of, like, our son has died and, like, we're putting him in the ground, and, like, we are expecting the Lord to bring good fruit in our life from this, and more than we could ask or imagine. And so we had a really sweet time honoring his life, and I really believed, guys, really, I felt like I had laid it all bare. I didn't feel like I had bottled up any of my emotions. I felt like, I've grieved him. I feel good. I don't feel mad at God. I felt good, like, emotionally and mentally. And so anyways, we decided, that was spring, so it had been about 4 or 5 months, and we were thinking about, okay, well, like, do we want to try to get pregnant again? And so we'll end this episode here, but I wanted to end it with me thinking, if we can just get pregnant, there is no way that this will ever happen to us again. And then I felt like very good emotionally, mentally, spiritually. I felt like I was in a great place to get pregnant again. And so we'll conclude this episode. That's our story about our process in a nutshell of George. And we'll pick up in our next episode telling you the story of Benjamin.